friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Tori, and today we are going to talk about the books that I read in August of 2025. This month was wild, you guys. My kids were involved in a whole bunch of activities, and beyond that, we had a ton of stuff pop up in our personal lives. My mother was hospitalized a couple of weeks ago for something completely out of the blue, and thankfully she is back home and she's feeling much better, but it just kind of threw the entire month completely out of whack. My kids were sick for a while this month, and that's always the pits in the middle of summer, and it was just a mess. So I actually got quite a bit of reading done despite everything else, but there were a couple of books on my TBR that I was not able to finish, which was a big bummer. But I still got a lot of reading done, so let's talk about it. We're going to start with the books that I either didn't read or DNFed this month. The two books that I unfortunately didn't get to in August were these two right here, which is a big bummer because I did really want to read both of them. The first one was the second book in Khan Iggulden's Conqueror series, Lords of the Bow, following the rise to power and reign of Genghis Khan. And then we have The Sanguine Sands, Book 2 in the Sharded Few series by Alec Hudson, which again, was really excited to read these, but I just did not have the brain space or time to get to either one, so I'm going to put them back on the shelf, and hopefully I'll be able to get to both of them soon. I also had one DNF this month, and that was No One Writes Back by Jang Yoon-jin. This is a Korean contemporary novel about a young man who has a fairly ordinary life, and he writes letters to people that he observes in his everyday goings on. And no one ever writes back, hence the title. At least that's what I gathered from the synopsis. However, when I started reading this book, some of the content right away in the first couple of pages immediately detached me from the story. He describes certain body parts of his dog in a way that I was like, yeah, no. So we're gonna put that one down and probably unhaul it because I could tell right away that it was just gonna include some things that, despite the theme of the story, which might be really interesting and deep and worth exploring, the execution and the things that the author was including in the way he was telling the story took me out of it pretty fast. So this one was unfortunately a DNF. That's all the bad news. Let's move on into the books that I did read this month. The first one was a buddy read with my good friends Andrew from Andrew's Wizardly Reads and Nico from Nico's Book Reviews, and we read, or at least partially read, An Alchemy of Masques and Mirrors by Curtis Craddock. This is book 1 in a trilogy called The Risen Kingdom, I believe. Yes, Risen Kingdoms. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of this book. It had kind of a steampunk, almost Three Musketeers French/Spanish influenced setting. There's airships, there's floating island kingdoms, there are automatons and a lot of that kind of stuff within the world, and yet also the author includes some really interesting magical abilities in this story as well. There's a twist on the vampire trope that I thought was really interesting. There's something called a glass walker with people that are able to walk between different mirrors, and just there was some really interesting magic system elements going on in this book that I really enjoyed. We follow two main characters throughout the book, one of which is a king's own musketeer, Jean-Claude, who is tasked with protecting the young princess Isabelle, who is our other main character. And Isabelle is kind of in this coming-of-age story, but she has a disability, and she has always been looked at as being kind of a outcast of society, that there's something wrong with her because she isn't magical, despite the fact that she's been born into a magical family, and because of her physical deformity. And Jean-Claude loves her like she is his own daughter. There's a really beautiful father-daughter relationship between the two of them. It's subtle, but it's definitely woven into the backbone of the story. And political things are happening, and this book actually revolves around a very tense political mystery, which I loved because I love fantasy and mystery genre blends so much. The thing that kind of made me fall off this book a little bit as I continued to go on through the story was it took a twist about 2/3 of the way through that wasn't what I was expecting, which in and of itself is fine. But the direction that the author chose to go with it really was uncomfortable for me as a reader, and I didn't love it. I will say, however, that I thought the author did a really good job challenging some of those presumptions about the worth of women in the history of this world. So I didn't think he handled it in a bad way necessarily. It was just, for me personally, I just kind of bounced off of it a little bit and didn't love the direction it took towards the end. It was fine. I had an okay time with it. I don't know that I feel strongly about continuing the trilogy, if I'm being totally honest. I may just leave it at book 1 and call it good. But yeah, that was my overall opinion of An Alchemy of Masques and Mirrors. Next up, I got to a book that has been on my TBR for a ridiculous amount of time as I've been reading things here on BookTube. I read Blood Song by Anthony Ryan a couple of years ago. Absolutely loved it. 5 stars. I really gel with Anthony Ryan's writing style specifically. He writes in a way that really gives me a good immersion. I love the military fantasy aspect and how he writes about it specifically. And I finally got to Tower Lord, which is book 2 in the Raven's Shadow trilogy. And while our first book follows one singular character, in Tower Lord we actually expand and follow a group of POV characters, most of which we met back in book 1, all of which we met back, no, 3 of which we met back in book 1? I can't remember exactly, but we know these characters, okay? I know some people take issue with the fact that we have multiple POVs in this book. That was actually something that didn't bother me, especially since one of the characters in Tower Lord is a favorite of mine from book 1, and I really loved that he got a full perspective in this book. Where I started to fall off the wagon a little bit in this book is, again, there's some themes in here that I feel like leaned a little bit heavy-handed for my tastes. I really like when authors want to explore themes that invite discussion and bring you into a table and have a conversation about it instead of really bludgeoning you with those themes, especially with a more modern angle. And just, there's not a lot of subtlety there. And there was one character in particular in here that leaned that way for me, especially. And he deals with a lot of really heavy themes in this book. And he did in Blood Song too. Anthony Ryan does not shy away from tackling heavy issues, and there's some stuff in this book that was really hard to read. There's abuse, there's persecution, there is desperately terrible control over someone's mind and body in this book. There's a lot in here that's pretty heavy. The thing that I think might diminish some readers' experience in this book, and for me it was a little bit of a tough call too, is that there's so many big scale conflicts going on in this story, and it's pretty complex, and there's a lot of deep character perspectives. It's a lot. Mentally, it is a lot to keep track of, and I had a hard time, even being used to political epic fantasy, keeping track of who was where and who was doing what, and all of these different names and all of these different locations, even with a map. It was a lot, and I did feel like it was just so much that I had to almost mentally detach from it a little bit more than I normally would, because it was a lot to keep track of, and I don't feel like the number of perspectives and the way that the perspectives were written did a good job of keeping everything together in a cohesive story, if that makes sense. Not to say that I didn't still enjoy the experience, and I definitely want to read book 3 and see how it ends, but it definitely was a lot and not necessarily executed in a way that I felt was seamless. So anyways, that's my overview of The Tower Lord by Anthony Ryan. Book 2, I only have one book left in this trilogy, which makes me very excited. If you've been keeping track of my TBR game, I did earn the Severus Snape character card for finishing Tower Lord, so I can add that to my Misfits collection officially. But yeah, Tower Lord by Anthony Ryan was the next book that I finished. So as you can see, I was already on track with some pretty heavy, complex fantasy books this month, and it kept going from there. Next up was How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. This is supposedly Hayao Miyazaki's favorite novel of all time. There is a film that he made based on this story, which I do want to watch because this book was probably my biggest disappointment of the month. And that really surprised me because I love Japanese novels. I love these kind of deep dives into what it means to be human and coming of age and all of the friendship and all of the things that this novel was concerned with. Where this book really lost me was it's telling the story of Copper, who's a young boy, probably early middle school age, mid-middle school age, who is learning about social relationships and who he's becoming as a person in regards to his family, his friends, the larger world around him. He's starting to have these really big philosophical thoughts for the first time, and his world is just expanding as it does often at that age. And that's a beautiful story to write. But the structure of this story really didn't work for me because there are the sections that are telling the story of Copper and his friends and what's going on in their life at school and at home as they are going through different things together. And then there are sections where Copper's uncle writes to him in a notebook and responds to comments that Copper is making or ideas that Copper has. And those sections, while it could have been a beautiful place to explore the relationship between an uncle and his nephew, and that kind of mentor-hero relationship between the two of them, it turned into this really long-winded philosophical lecture every single time. And those sections were often longer than the story being told about Copper and his friends. And it wasn't that there weren't some cool ideas and concepts within those uncle sections. Obviously, I'm not here looking to agree with everything I ever read in books. That's not something that I have as an expectation. There were some things in here that I fundamentally disagreed with, and that's completely fine. But it wasn't that at all. It was just it was this long, dry textbook lecture. And it would go off on these tangents that were just so loosely connected to things, and it just felt like we were just kind of word vomiting at quite a few points during this story. And I really didn't love it, which makes me really sad because the story at the heart, which is Copper and his friends, I loved, and I wanted more of that, and I wanted the depth to be there, and it just wasn't. And the author spent more time lecturing his audience on the fundamentals of humanity and philosophy, and that's not the kind of book that I was looking to read. So, yeah, I did earn, for my TBR game, I did earn the Zario character card for this, at least, which will be added to my collection. But yeah, this one was a miss for me, you guys, and that made me really sad because I love Miyazaki's work, and I just didn't get it with this book. Continuing my complex epic fantasy theme of the month, I then picked up The Lions of Al-Rassan, which was the read-along book for my private Discord this month with my patrons and my group in there. And this was my first Guy Gavriel K read ever, which I think, to everybody who's been telling me in my audience and within my friend group here in the community that this was an excellent place to start with Guy Gavriel K, totally agree. I love that it's a standalone. It gave me a really good sense of his writing style, his character work, the way that he famously has said that he writes historical fiction with a quarter turn to the fantastic. Totally get that. I'm still processing, and I know I have one book like that almost every month where I'm still processing how I feel about certain reads. Let's just start with the things that I really liked about this book. I loved the overarching concept of this story and the themes that Kay was exploring when it comes to platonic friendship and respect and love, and the tragic heroism of global conflict and war and violence, and the way that the average everyday person takes the brunt oftentimes of these glorious escapades of kings and monarchs and generals. And at the heart of it was a deep introspective character cast that I really enjoyed. I liked the way that he built the relationships between the characters. The dynamics between all of them were really engaging and interesting. His prose, for the most part, was really descriptive and deep and complex, which I also really enjoyed, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about later. I also think that Kay is a very good tension writer. The moments in this book that had me leaning forward and like my shoulders coming up and getting tense while I was reading, there were so many of those, and I always appreciate an author who can build tension in a really convincing way in a fictitious world. I think that's brilliant. Those were very positive things about this book for me, and there were a couple of characters in here that left a pretty big impact on me personally. Rodrigo, if you know, you know. Love Rodrigo. I also really liked Alvar a lot. The other thing that I like about the cast is that there's a lot of different perspectives on the story. We have the young idealistic soldier who's like on his first campaign. We have the grizzled veteran captain who's seen it all, and he knows that he appreciates what's at home more than he appreciates the glory of the battlefield. We have the strategic, charismatic advisor slash warrior. We have the young female physician who is really good at what she does and has a history very deeply rooted in her culture and her community. We have an older nobleman who is a sole survivor of a horrible atrocity. We have, like, there's so many different perspectives on what's happening throughout the story, and I really liked that. So some of the things on the other end for me, I liked his prose a lot for the most part, but there were a few elements of his writing that I did not like at all. First of all, and this is something that I know you guys have heard me say about other books in the past, I'm very picky about the way that authors include the sexual behavior of their characters. And in this book specifically, I didn't like it. I don't think that he's good at writing it. I don't think that he is good at giving it meaning and giving it a reason to be there, or to be described in the way that it is, or to be as explicit as it is. It did borderline on wish fulfillment even in one part of the novel, toward the middle slash 2/3 of the way through. The other thing that I noticed was a lot of his dialogue, when it was more of a light-hearted conversation, felt really weird and forced. The way that the characters would talk to each other was a little melodramatic in a way that didn't feel realistic to them at all. And the other thing is, he oftentimes in really high impact moments where he wants a big emotional reaction, he will stop naming the characters so that you're not entirely sure who's where and what's happening. Maybe somebody dies and you don't know for the next 8 to 10 pages, which, again, on the surface is fine, but the way that he wrote it, it almost felt like too much of an author insert. And maybe this is just me as a writer, but it felt a little bit too much like that authorial voice coming through and being like, no, I'm keeping you at arm's length for dramatic effect. And I'm the type of person, I want to be in there. I want to be in the dirt with those characters. I want to know exactly whose face I'm looking at, and I want to feel it up close and personal, right? And again, personal preference. I know other readers that I've talked to that really love this book really love the way that he does that. So that's a me thing that you can take or leave. I'm definitely going to try another Guy Gavriel K book. I'm very intrigued by Under Heaven, which has a more Asian setting. And I can see from reading this book why people love the stories he tells, because his character work is really gripping, is really engaging. And I found myself having a hard time putting this down, which for how epic and complex of a story it is, I usually want to take them in smaller chunks. This one, I was having a hard time putting down, and I add that as a full kudos to the author, because I appreciate when an epic fantasy of this caliber can hold my attention and give me that just one more chapter vibe, even despite the fact that the chapters in this book are very long. So yeah, Guy Gavriel K. I've officially read a book by this author, finally, so all of you have been waiting and waiting and waiting to hear my thoughts on this book specifically. We did it, yay! And yeah, I definitely will read another Guy Gavriel K. I had a good time with this one. There were a few nitpicks, but overall, I can see why so many people love K's writing. And last but not least, I needed a shift. I needed something with a completely different vibe than what I'd been reading the rest of the month. So I picked up a manga, and I decided to read Island in a Puddle, Volume 1 by Kei Sanbe. This is a little bit of like underground criminal gang meets Freaky Friday, is the best way I know how to describe it. There's a young boy and his little sister who are being neglected and left behind by their mother, who's not taking care of them the way that she needs to. And conversely, there is also a young man who is a wanted criminal. He is not a great person. And the young boy and this criminal, their bodies get swapped, or not their bodies, but their brains get swapped into each other's bodies during a thunderstorm on a Ferris wheel. It's a really interesting premise, I'm not gonna lie. I actually think that body swapping tropes can be kind of interesting. I thought Freaky Friday was a really cool concept when I was younger, and I think that this has a lot of potential to be really interesting, because you have a middle schooler essentially recognizing that he's a wanted criminal suddenly, and how is he going to protect his sister from the criminal that is now with her. And like, it's a very interesting take. It's not too dark at this point, and the way that the story is being handled by the author, I think, is pretty good so far, and I'm definitely here for Volume 2. It was a very quick read. I like the art style. I'm invested in the characters already, and I'm hoping for kind of a redemption arc, maybe, with the criminal character. We'll see. But yeah, I ordered Volume 2, and I'm looking forward to continuing on in the series. I think there's only 5 volumes of this, and I don't think it's ongoing. I think it's done. I'll have to double check that, but I think it is a finished 5-volume series. And I do want to check out this author's other work. He has another one called Erased that I've heard really good things about that I want to try. But yeah, interesting concept, fun read. I'm invested in the characters, and I'm definitely going to continue with Volume 2. These are all of the books that I read in the month of August. I feel pretty good about the fact that I got through this many, and I continued a series, which is something that I always get really excited about every month because I have way too many open series on my TBR right now. I got to finally read Guy Gavriel K, which has been a big goal of mine throughout the year of 2025. I had a really good time with the manga that I tried. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of disappointments, but overall, I feel like it was a pretty good month. And I would love to know down in the comments below what you got to read in August and what your favorites were. And let me know if you've read any of the books that I held up and talked about today. Let me know what you thought of them down in the comments, because I always love hearing you guys' perspectives on the same books that we're all reading. So I hope that you guys are having a fantastic week. I hope that you are reading some 5-star reads no matter what genre they're in, and I will see you in the next video.